Good morning guys, and welcome to Hikelopedia. Today I'm starting off here in Thomson Nature Park. Now you may well be asking, I'm sure you are, what is he doing in such a non-exciting touristy park, you know, when he's famous for off-road exploration and all this kind of stuff? Well, the reason is the theme of today's video is plants, or more specifically plants that were of commercial value and were used from the early 1800s or during the colonial period, because you know I'm interested in that kind of history. So I'm actually here searching for one specific kind of plant. I saw online that there was some here, and honestly I have no idea where else to look in Singapore for this plant, even though years ago it used to be everywhere. So I'm gonna start looking now, and hopefully in a few minutes I'll be able to tell you about what I'm looking for. So let's go. Well, that didn't take long, around 5 minutes in, and I think, I'm not entirely sure, please let me know in the comments, that I think I've found what I'm looking for, which is this. It's called Gambier, or Gambier, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But anyway, now Gambier was one of the first crops to catch on as a moneymaker in colonial Singapore. Gambier, or Pale Katechu, my pronunciation is probably horrible, is an astringent extract prepared from the leaves and stems of Uncaria Gambier, a climbing plant that is native to Borneo and Sumatra. Now it has numerous medicinal uses, the list is too long to go into, but it was used mainly in the tanning and dyeing industry. Now when the British arrived in 1819, there were just a handful of Gambier plantations run by Chinese immigrants and Malays. Most of the produce was exported to China, but by the mid-1930s the Europeans had also developed a taste for Gambier, and this led to a huge increase in its cultivation. Within 10 years there were around 500 Gambier plantations in the north and west regions of Singapore, and most of the primary forest in those areas had been cleared, either for the Gambier plantations or for fuel needed in its production. Several local businessmen, including Xia Yu Qin or Xu You Jin in Mandarin, whose grave I visited in an earlier video that you can see up there, made a fortune from its large-scale cultivation. But the Gambier gold rush in Singapore didn't last long, as growing it depleted the soil of nutrients, and within around 20 years the earth was completely infertile. For this reason, starting in around the 1870s, Gambier production in Singapore fell into decline, with most of it moving across the Johor Strait into Malaysia. Also interesting is that pepper was also an important cash crop during this period, because it was grown in conjunction with Gambier, as the boiled Gambier leaves provided ideal fertilizer for the growth of pepper trees. There is a great blog post by James Tan showing in detail the production process for Gambier. I'll link to it in the description. No, this is actually my first visit to Thomson Nature Park, and it's quite nice, although it's pretty small. It's the best way to describe it. All these like ruined villages. It's a bit like Singapore's Angkor Wat. You know, I'm still not 100% sure that the plant that I found earlier was Gambier, but if anybody knows any better, then please let me know in the comments, or if you know where there's some plants that I can go and have a look at, that would be even better. Yeah, but anyway, it's time to move on to my next location. One thing I will say though, today it's so bloody hot. It's only just gone 9 o'clock and I'm sweating to death already. God help the person who sits next to me on the bus going home tonight. Now, before you ask, why am I not on my bike today? Well, the simple answer is, as I was going to be spending quite a bit of time inside nature parks and gardens, I didn't want to leave my bike locked up unattended for long periods of time, because normally I just leave it for 5 minutes at most, or otherwise I take it inside, because you know Bromptons are highly desirable these days. So that's why I'm on public transport today. Okay, I didn't walk either, because basically the distances today were going to be too far for me to cover within the time that I've got to film. So I'm not being lazy, I'm just being practical. Anyway, it's getting bloody hot now, so it's time to put the sun gear on, I think. Now, before I get on to my next plant, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to House of Samosas for sending me over a box of 15 delicious samosas out of the blue following my curry puff video last week. They were still piping hot when they arrived, so my son and I tucked in straight away. I also ate some of them for breakfast this morning before venturing out, and I have to say they were absolutely amazing. They do a variety of traditional and unique savoury and sweet flavours, and they even provide dipping sauces to boot. So if you're interested in ordering some top class samosas, then check out their website. I'll link to it in the description below. While Gambier and pepper were the crops of choice in north and western regions, nutmeg was the go-to tree for colonial landowners who lived nearer the city. First introduced to Singapore from Bencoolen by Raffles in 1819, the growing of this once valuable crop proliferated rapidly. So much so that in just 25 years there were more than 40,000 nutmeg trees in Singapore, most of them in and around the Orchard Road area. However, nutmeg failed to bring the long-term riches many had hoped for, as disease struck local orchards starting in the late 1840s. The culprit, a local beetle, sounding the death knell for this fragrant moneymaker. If you're interested in finding out more about the history of nutmeg, then you can watch the video I made about it here. Gutta Percha, made from trees like this beautiful specimen behind me, first came to the attention of Westerners in 1822, when Singapore-based East India Company surgeon William Montgomery noticed Malay people used it for the handles of their parangs or machetes, a gum resin harvested from trees of the Sapotaceae family. The name is thought to be an anglicised version of two Malay words, geta for sticky gum and percha from the name of a related tree. The resin was deemed useful because of its unique properties. Usually hard, it becomes pliable when soaked in hot water. Fascinated by this, Montgomery sent some samples back to England, and soon industrialists were using it in the manufacture of everyday products. Initially used for simple things such as boot soles and bottle stoppers, demand surged with the advent of subsea telegraph lines, as British scientists found it was ideal as a cable insulator. First used in a cross-channel cable in 1851, by 1900, more than 200,000 nautical miles of Gutta Percha lined submarine telegraph cables had been laid around the globe, in what was a precursor of today's subsea internet cable network. Over time, Gutta Percha was replaced by synthetic materials, but it still has its uses today, mainly as a dental filling material, but also in the manufacture of golf balls. Although technically it was never grown commercially here in Singapore, most of the trees came from Indonesia and Malaysia, Singapore was the centre of its trade. Also, we have a couple of beautiful examples like this one in the Botanic Gardens, so I thought I'd include it in today's video. So there. Now, while I'm still in the Botanic Gardens, it would be rude not to talk about another tree that was to prove extremely important commercially to Singapore, and it has deep ties to this place, the Botanic Gardens, and that plant is rubber. Rubber first arrived in Singapore in 1877 when 22 plants arrived from Sri Lanka. Now, half of them were planted here at the Botanic Gardens, while the other half went to Malaysia. At first, there was absolutely no interest in this Amazonian upstart, as planters were unwilling to risk switching from their established plantations of crops such as sugar and coffee. But then two things happened at around the turn of the century there or thereabouts that suddenly made rubber a viable and desirable thing to plant. First was the advent of the automobile and a huge increase in demand for rubber, an increase that wild rubber trees could not satisfy. The second was the appointment of Henry Ridley as the director of the Botanic Gardens here. Ridley set about experimenting with ways to maximize latex production. Soon, not only had he discovered a revolutionary way to tap the trees that maximized production as well as lengthening their lifespan, but he also managed to shorten the period needed for young trees to start producing. Tan Che-yen, grandson of Tan Tok-seng and a friend of Ridley, soon became the first person to establish a rubber plantation in the Malaya Peninsula at Bukit Lintang in 1906. He was soon followed by Dr. Lim Boon Keng, who set up Sembawang rubber plantations. Disease and the falling price of coffee soon persuaded other planters to hop on the rubber bandwagon. By 1934, around 54,000 acres of Singapore's land was covered with rubber plantations. Now, that may not sound a lot when you compare it to Johor's 900,000 acres, but it still made up around a third of Singapore's total land area. And although Singapore was never a big producer of rubber due to land constraints, it did become a major player as a regional transshipment, trading and processing centre. If you look into the history of the rubber industry in Singapore, it's like a who's who of rich and famous Chinese. Lim Nee Soon, Tan Lark Share, Lee Kong Chen and Tan Kah Kee all got into the rubber industry early and made a fortune as global demand soared, before branching out into other sectors. One offshoot of the rubber industry was pineapple farming. Young rubber trees took around 5 years or so to mature, so planters would grow pineapples as a catch crop until their trees were ready. This led to pineapple production and canning also becoming a big earner, with Tan Kah Kee and Lim Nee Soon doing particularly well. Lim, who began to export his products all around the world, eventually became known as the Pineapple King. Another moneymaker from Mother Nature for Singapore was sago. Made from the powdery pith of the centre of various species of tropical palm, sago is a popular ingredient in desserts in many areas of the world. And although it was grown and consumed here in small quantities, it was never planted on a commercial scale. Instead, Singapore became a processing centre, as raw sago could be imported cheaply from Borneo and Sumatra. The finished sago was then exported to India and Europe, and business boomed. By the late 1800s, there were around 30 factories producing approximately 17,000 tons of processed sago for export each year. Most of them located around this area, hence the street name. The industry fell into decline starting in the 1950s as industrialization and alternative products became available, and the sago plants eventually relocated to Indonesia. Slightly off topic but also interesting, Sago Street and Sago Lane were also once well known locally for things other than food production, namely Chinese death houses and prostitution. If you're interested, you can find out more information about that online. Now, there was another tree that was cultivated en masse in Singapore at around the same time as Gambier, pepper and nutmeg, but unlike the others, this tree is still around in Singapore today, all over the place. What is it, you may ask? Yes, the coconut. Chuju Chat, who I've talked about in earlier videos, was one of the early coconut barons. While even in the late 19th century, Thomas Dunman had a 160 hectare coconut plantation along the coast here in Katong, while a J.W. Angus had a 120 hectare plantation here in Badok. Although it wasn't here because this is reclaimed land, it was a bit further inland from here. And of course, Geylang was also the site of huge coconut plantations, as I talked about in my Islamic heritage video a couple of weeks back. It made sense to grow such a crop because coconut flesh, coconut oil, and pretty much every part of the coconut tree can be used in one way or another. The husks can be used as mulch or as fuel. The leaves can be used to make any number of things, including baskets, hats, mats, and roofing material, while the trunks were used in construction. Coconut oil was even once used as a fuel for street lighting here in Singapore. Now, there's not a lot of information online about the decline of the coconut plantations in Singapore, but I presume that it was probably to do with urbanization, especially along the coast in places like Katong and Badok. If anybody knows any different, then please let me know in the comments. But that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and please consider subscribing. And if you'd like to catch my adventures every Saturday morning, then you can also hit that bell. And once again, I'd like to say a big thank you to my coffee mates over here. I really appreciate your support and your generosity. So that's it for today, guys. Take it easy, and I'll see you next week. Over and out. I'm gonna have some lunch now.